Hello, I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist, and every week or so I write a newsletter all about the future of radio and international radio trends. And this is the podcast version of it, where I try and read it without hesitation, repetition, or deviation, or indeed any editing whatsoever. And this week it's all about the BBC Sounds app, because the BBC Annual Report is out. There's tons of interesting numbers in the BBC Annual Report, but I just thought I would dive deeply into the BBC Sounds app numbers, because it's always nice to see what they're doing. The corporation's audio app, as we know, BBC Sounds, now has 3.8 million people using it on average every week. Now that's up by 300,000 year on year, which is an increase in weekly users of 8.5%. That's not too bad. Now I reckon that makes the weekly reach of BBC Sounds about 7.3% of the whole of the UK. Now, by way of comparison, BBC Radio in total doesn't reach 7.3%, it reaches 61%, which is a figure that includes BBC Sounds as well as other platforms. Average streaming time in BBC Sounds was 13.2 million a week, which I reckon makes that about 3.5 hours per listener, up from 3.1 hours last year. BBC Radio as a whole, 14.7 hours per listener overall. That's 498 million per week. I think they're pretty good numbers for BBC Sounds, but I don't think that everything's quite rosy in the BBC Sounds garden, because the total number of 16 to 34-year-olds using the app per week has dropped year on year, down from 572,000 to just 570,000. And I wonder whether there's a content problem there, or a brand problem, or is it just the app? Who knows? But why aren't younger people under 34 or 35, using the thing as much as they used to? And what is the 3.8 million weekly number made from? Now, if you have a look through the BBC Annual Report, there's lots and lots of numbers in there, and lots of those numbers are caveated as being UK-only numbers. The BBC Sounds app is not, and I think that's interesting. It only became available internationally from mid-September 2020, and the annual report runs from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So the previous year won't have had a full year of international use. So I'm wondering whether the growth is from UK users, or whether actually the growth is from international audiences, and the BBC deliberately hasn't put UK users because it's not UK users. Don't know what the answer is, but I'm just putting that out there. BBC Sounds includes radio, music and podcasts, as any listener will know. It's seen a 23% increase in total UK plays to 1.54 billion. Total UK plays, they say there, you see. I think a 23% increase in total plays is quite impressive on a user growth of just 8.5%. But quite a lot of it is live radio. 55% was basically live radio in the app. On demand, which is both podcast and catch-up radio, not that there's much difference, accounts for 45%. On-demand speech, 37% of total plays. And the on-demand music streams and catch-up music programs is just 7%. This is not a Spotify replacement. This is something for people who want to hear people talking. And even if we assume that BBC Sounds' total time spent listening is all radio, it means that BBC Sounds is just 2.6% of all BBC radio listening. Now, BBC Sounds gets breathless promotion across the BBC, including top-of-hourly promotion that displaced mention of digital radio, but the no longer promoted DAB is 16 times larger than BBC Sounds. BBC iPlayer, by comparison, is responsible for 16% of BBC TV viewing instead of just 2.6% of all BBC radio listening. And BBC iPlayer is responsible for, and this is astonishing, 43% of all 16 to 34s watching BBC TV. That's an incredible figure, 43%. Now, unlike the global player, BBC Sounds has no third-party content within it. That's a change of mind after they prominently promoted that it would have it in 2019. Weirdly, the week after the BBC pulled its podcast from Google Podcasts in an attempt to encourage audiences to use its app instead. And the BBC has recently also pulled some of its podcasts from the whole open RSS ecosystem, making them exclusive for the first month within the BBC Sounds app. One such show is the BBC's Friday night comedy feed. So if you're a listener on Open RSS, the topical news shows The News Quiz and The Now Show have yet to hear about Boris Johnson's resignation, which is baffling. But even that hasn't benefited the app, it seems. Audio's hot, and BBC Sounds is a competent audio app, and once people download it, BBC Sounds appears to be doing a good job at cross-promoting programmes to increase consumption. But the BBC's tactics of restricting content elsewhere don't appear to be working, and in spite of the millions of pounds worth of free promotion, 16 to 34-year-olds are using it less, and that, I think, should be a concern. Elsewhere, Michael Mignano, the co-founder of Anchor and a former Spotify employee, posted a long piece about the standards innovation paradox, which essentially says that standards are good to get companies up and running, but there comes a time when you just have to break out and do proprietary stuff because you can't enhance standards or get them changed fast enough. Now, he gives podcasting's RSS, I think mistakenly, as an example of standards which can't be extended or changed. And one of the things that he does in that piece is he links to documentation on tags that Apple devised as an extension to the RSS standard, which are quoted on Google Podcasts' website, which also uses Apple's extensions, which kind of rather breaks the point that he's trying to make there. Now, I wrote a piece about this, of course I did, and I highlighted that the real benefit comes when you have a sizable market share, because you can essentially set the standards. Anchor's the largest podcast hosting company in the world, which Mignano used to run. Spotify is the second largest podcast playback app. If anyone can set the standards, those two can. But instead, it's a black box, and no, you can't. Now, I interviewed Michael for the Podland podcast. You'll find it wherever you get this podcast. He was very generous with his time, but I do wonder whether I got through. Other examples he gave were the apparently unchanging standards of HTML and CSS, which are anything but unchanging. But still, there we go. Now, an update from last time when I was talking about 4BC, their new breakfast show. Yes, it is much like 4KQ's old breakfast show. It's directly led to my future mother-in-law asking me to retune her car radio to 4BC. I gave her 4BH and the ABC as well. It's a very different listen from the previous breakfast show, much more positive and happy, much less serious and informative. And yes, all of 4BC is playing a few shows an hour in its local output, which I find personally bewildering. But then I'm neither a programmer nor someone who's grown up in Australia, so frankly my thoughts don't really matter. Page Ninaba, crazy name, crazy guy, tells me that Namibia's Radio Wave 95.7 sold 40,000 shoelaces for $5 each in aid of a cancer charity. That's a lot of money, and designated one day as Lace Up Day when you proudly wore yours. It's a really nice promotion. You should click and take a look at the image of them. It's good for charity and a nice idea. Thank you, Paige, for telling me about that. In Australia, the ABC tells the story of a day a power outage made the whole of the ABC website revert back to 2011. I've no idea how that could have happened. But apparently it was finally the time when the corporation seemed to take the internet seriously, and just over 2 years later have almost completed the upgrade to a more capable system. I have to say, when I moved here in 2015, the ABC's website was not great. But it's an impressive and performant thing these days, and I've been quite impressed at how the thing works now. And a few slightly down stories to end with. As if print media didn't have enough to worry about, the price of paper has doubled this year, but you didn't know that. And also global ad revenue is dropping, says WARC. Hooray! Thank you to Richard Hilton, James Masterton and Brunn Audio Consulting for your ongoing support of this newsletter and this podcast. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you also to Rolf Lovstrom for your contribution last week. Rolf, I know nothing about you. So please do send me more details on that if you wish. If you'd like to support my work in any way, you can buy me a coffee, become a member to give regularly or just give a one-off coffee or 5. Buymeacoffee.com/James Cridland is the place to go. And my professional website, james.cridland.net, that's right, has more details about who I am and what I do and whether I can help you further. And you can subscribe to this as a newsletter, which is possibly slightly less full of fluffs, not half. You can find that at james.crid.land. And until next time, keep listening.